salary bloat. That's what she called me. I was hunched over my workbench, soldering the final connections on a prototype circuit when the department-wide video announcement pinged on my monitor. And there she was, Vivienne, 32 years old if the LinkedIn profile wasn't padded. Probably the type who thought innovation meant adding more buzzwords to a PowerPoint deck. The CFO introduced her as the cost optimization specialist, which in corporate language means executioner with a spreadsheet. Polished, poised, styled like she'd stepped out of a business magazine cover shoot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hello everyone, she announced with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. I'm here to realign our budget allocations and maximize our ROI on human resources. Her gaze settled on me through the screen like she was already calculating the savings from my retirement package. I didn't react, just calmly saved the schematics for the Helixon processor modification I'd been developing for 6 years, transferred them to my private cloud storage labeled grandkids' birthday photos, and backed it up to 3 separate locations. Kira Sakamoto wasn't about to be caught unprepared. By afternoon, I overheard her in the innovation lab joking with 2 freshly graduated engineers about legacy salary structures. I'm 53, not ancient, but in Vivienne's world, if your skills didn't come with a trendy certificate from the past 5 years, you were a financial liability. The next morning brought the mandatory Strategic Vision Summit. Everyone seated in the Maplewood conference room pretending we weren't at a thinly veiled culling. Vivienne pulled up a presentation filled with phrases like agile cost structure and value-based resource allocation. I watched 4 junior developers nod like they were witnessing a revolutionary breakthrough in management science. Certain team members, particularly those with compensation packages established in earlier market conditions, will need to undergo comprehensive value assessment, she announced, eyes drifting pointedly in my direction. We appreciate your historical contributions, Kira. Historical, like my work belonged in a museum exhibit labeled, Quaint Engineering Practices of the Past. I maintained a serene expression, the kind you perfect when you've survived 6 CEOs and 9 restructurings. The kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly which cards you're holding while others are still trying to figure out the game. That evening, I stayed late at Axiom Technologies. Not because anyone asked, I wanted to double-check my digital footprint across the company's systems. I quietly reviewed the patent database, confirming that everything was properly filed and cross-referenced. United States Patent # 9783421B, the cornerstone of our flagship product line, the Helixon microprocessor architecture, still prominently displayed my name as primary inventor. 17 additional patents, all bearing my signature, all critical to Axiom's market dominance, all securely documented both in internal systems and with the Patent and Trademark Office. I carefully reviewed the assignment clauses in my original employment contract from 2011, paying special attention to Section 12D, the clause I'd personally insisted on during negotiations. Patents developed by employee remain under conditional licensing to employer contingent upon continued employment or mutually agreeable termination terms. Most people skip these details. I framed them. The next morning, Vivienne had installed herself in the glass-walled corner office that used to belong to our retired VP of Engineering. Through the transparent barrier, I could see her gesturing dramatically during a video call, probably explaining how much dead weight she planned to cut. I continued my work quietly, making final adjustments to the latest Helixon refinement, the one that would increase processing efficiency by 22% while reducing power consumption by 1/3. The one that would make our competitors' products look like antiques. The one I hadn't formally submitted to the company patent portal yet. By Wednesday, the whispers started. Restructuring. Right-sizing. Realignment. The corporate euphemisms for "we're firing people" echoed through the break room. Conversations. Young engineers huddled together, checking their project assignments to gauge their safety. Mid-level managers suddenly became extraordinarily attentive to their metrics dashboards. Vivienne hosted what she called a transparency session in the afternoon. Her voice carried the rehearsed empathy of someone who'd practiced sounding human. In today's competitive landscape, we need to ensure every resource allocation generates maximum value. Resource allocation. That's how she referred to the careers of people who dedicated years to building Axiom Technologies from a struggling startup to an industry leader. I noticed the spreadsheet she'd pulled up on the screen before switching to her presentation. My name highlighted in bright red, salary figure circled, a comment bubble I couldn't quite read. When she caught me looking, she quickly clicked to the next slide. But I'd seen enough. Later that day, an email arrived in my inbox. Individual value assessment meeting, mandatory. Scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow with Vivienne and someone from HR. Not hard to decode that message. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from worry, from preparation. I spent hours organizing files, reviewing contracts, taking screenshots of critical patent documentation. I prepared a timeline of every major innovation I'd contributed to Axiom's success over the past 15 years. The quantum stabilization method that had become industry standard. The reconfigurable processor architecture that made our chips 40% more efficient than our closest competitor. The thermal management system that every smartphone manufacturer now licensed. These weren't just achievements. They were leverage. Morning arrived with steel gray clouds that matched my resolve. I dressed carefully, charcoal suit, crisp white blouse, minimal jewelry. Professional. Dignified. Prepared. I arrived at the meeting room 5 minutes early, a leather portfolio containing select documents under my arm. Vivienne arrived precisely on time, trailing a nervous-looking HR representative named Jaden. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kira, thank you for joining us. As you know, Axiom is undergoing necessary cost restructuring to remain competitive in today's market. Her voice had the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered this speech many times before. Your current compensation package is significantly above market rate for your position, and we've identified several redundancies between your role and our newer engineering teams. I remained silent, watching her flip through her tablet to what was clearly a prepared termination document. We value your historical contributions to Axiom, she continued, but we need to align our resources with future growth areas. We're prepared to offer a separation package of 3 months' salary and continued health benefits for 60 days. I noticed how she emphasized historical again. Like my value belonged exclusively to the past. I understand, I said quietly, my voice betraying none of the calculation happening behind my calm exterior. Vivienne seemed momentarily surprised by my lack of resistance. She slid the tablet toward me. If you're comfortable moving forward, we can process this today. Your official end date would be 2 weeks from now, though you can use that as paid. Leave if you prefer not to come into the office. I studied the document carefully, scrolling through each section while Jaden from HR shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then I reached the intellectual property section, the standard clause about all work remaining the property of Axiom Technologies. I have a question about this section, I said, pointing to the screen. How does this interact with the conditional licensing arrangement in my original employment contract? Vivienne blinked. I'm sorry? Section 12D of my 2011 employment agreement. The patent licensing contingency clause. Jaden looked confused. Vivienne's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. All intellectual property developed during your employment belongs to Axiom, she stated with practiced confidence. That's standard across the industry. I allowed myself the smallest smile as I reached into my portfolio and extracted a document. Protected in a clear sleeve. My original employment contract, with Section 12D highlighted in yellow. Actually, my agreement isn't standard. When I joined Axiom in 2011, we were a struggling startup without the cash to offer competitive salaries. So I negotiated special terms. I slid the document across the table. My patents remain mine, with Axiom granted an exclusive license. Contingent upon my continued employment or a mutually agreeable separation. Vivienne's eyes narrowed as she scanned the document, her confident facade beginning to crack. This can't be. HR would have flagged this during our review. Jaden leaned over to look at the contract, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. I've never seen this clause before. This isn't in our current template. It wouldn't be, I replied calmly. It was a unique arrangement. My point is, this termination agreement needs significant revision before I can consider it. Vivienne's voice took on a harder edge. We can have legal review this, but I doubt a clause from 12 years ago would supersede standard intellectual property practices. I nodded thoughtfully. By all means, consult legal. While you're at it, you might want to have them review the patent assignments for the Helixon architecture, quantum stabilization protocols, and thermal regulation systems. I believe you'll find my name prominently featured as primary inventor. On all of them. The air in the room changed. What had been a routine termination meeting was now something entirely different. Are you threatening the company, Ms. Sakamoto? Vivienne asked, her voice tight. Not at all. I'm clarifying the actual terms of my relationship with Axiom Technologies. I closed my portfolio. I believe we should reschedule this discussion. After you've had time to review the relevant documentation. I'd hate for any of us to make decisions without complete information. Vivienne studied me with new eyes, recognizing too late that she'd miscalculated. I wasn't just another aging engineer to be discarded. I was the foundation upon which much of Axiom's success had been built. "We'll be in touch," she said finally, gathering her materials with barely concealed irritation. I nodded politely and left the room, my heart pounding with adrenaline but my exterior composed. In the hallway, younger engineers glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity, assuming I'd received the same fate as others before me. Little did they know that the game had only just begun. Back at my workstation, I continued my regular tasks as if nothing unusual had happened. I reviewed test results from the latest prototype, made notes on potential improvements, and answered questions from junior team members. Meanwhile, I monitored my email, waiting for the inevitable escalation. It came 3 hours later. Meeting request, CTO office, 2 p.m. The Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Alara Voss, rarely became involved in personnel matters. Her sudden interest confirmed what I already knew. Vivienne had raised the alarm. The CTO's office occupied a corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Minneapolis skyline. Dr. Voss had been with Axiom for only 4 years, recruited from a competitor with promises of building the next generation of computing architecture. She was brilliant in her own right, but she hadn't been part of the early struggles, the late nights, the breakthrough moments that had defined Axiom's rise. "Kara, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Unlike Vivienne's practiced corporate speak, Dr. Voss tended toward directness. "There seems to be some confusion about your employment agreement and patent arrangements." "No confusion on my part," I replied. "Just details that weren't properly reviewed before today's termination meeting." Dr. Voss nodded slowly. "I've pulled the records. You hold 18 patents critical to our product line, all with this unusual licensing arrangement." She studied me with genuine curiosity. "Why didn't you ever mention this during our previous conversations?" "It never seemed relevant until someone decided I was too expensive to keep around." The CTO sighed, removing her glasses and pinching the bridge of her nose. "This complicates matters. Only if the company intends to terminate my employment. Without mutually agreeable terms," I pointed out. "What would you consider agreeable terms?" she asked. I'd had 15 years to consider this question. Continued employment at my current salary and title for a minimum of 3 years. A formal role in mentoring the next generation of engineers. And recognition of my contributions to Axiom's success. Dr. Voss leaned back in her chair. "That's directly counter to the cost-cutting directives from finance." "I understand. But those directives were issued without complete information about the potential costs of my departure." I maintained steady eye contact. "If I leave under the current proposed terms, Axiom would need to renegotiate licenses for 18 critical patents. The market rate for those licenses would far exceed my current salary." For the first time, I saw genuine respect in the CTO's expression. She recognized the chess move for what it was, not desperation, but strategy. "Let me speak with the executive team," she said finally. "This is beyond my authority alone." I nodded and rose to leave. At the door, I paused. "Dr. Voss, you should also know that I've completed work on the next-generation thermal regulation system. It increases efficiency by 22% while reducing power consumption by a third. I haven't filed the patent paperwork yet." Her eyes widened slightly. "That would put us years ahead of competitors." "Indeed it would," I agreed. "The documentation is complete, just waiting for submission." As I walked back to my workstation, I could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Word traveled fast in engineering circles. Several colleagues nodded to me with newfound respect, having somehow heard whispers of my confrontation with the cost-cutting initiative. One senior engineer even gave me a discreet thumbs up when Vivienne walked past, her face tight with barely controlled frustration. The rest of the day passed in relative calm, though I noticed increased activity around the executive offices. Through the glass walls, I could see Vivienne gesticulating emphatically while Dr. Voss remained characteristically composed. The CFO joined them later, his expression growing increasingly troubled as the conversation continued. I packed up at my usual time, methodically organizing my workspace as I'd done for 15 years. As I walked to the elevator, my phone buzzed with an email notification. "Meeting request, CEO office, 8:30 a.m. tomorrow." I arrived at the CEO's office 20 minutes early the next morning. Not to appear eager, but to center myself before the conversation that would define my future at Axiom Technologies. The executive floor had that particular silence that comes with expensive carpet and sound-dampening architecture. Through the glass walls of the conference room adjacent to the CEO's office, I could see Vivienne already inside, spreading documents across the polished oak table like she was preparing for battle. She glanced up, saw me waiting in the reception area, and quickly looked away. I smiled to myself. In her world of PowerPoint strategies and cost-benefit analyses, she'd never anticipated encountering something as simple yet powerful as ownership. At precisely 8:30, the CEO's assistant ushered me into the spacious corner office where Nolan Chambers had orchestrated Axiom's rise to industry prominence over the past decade. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were Dr. Voss, the CFO Marcus Delaney, and Vivienne. A legal representative I recognized as Axiom's chief counsel, Imani Washington, sat slightly apart, a stack of folders before her. "Ms. Sakamoto, thank you for joining us," Nolan began, his tone carefully neutral. "We've been reviewing your employment arrangements and patent holdings in detail." I nodded, taking the offered seat with unhurried confidence. "I appreciate the thorough attention." Vivienne shifted impatiently. "Let's cut to the chase. Your contract contains unusual provisions that complicate our restructuring efforts." "My contract contains provisions that protect my intellectual contributions to this company," I corrected gently. "There's nothing complicated about ownership." Marcus, the CFO, cleared his throat. "The financial implications of renegotiating licenses for your patents would be substantial, especially considering the current market pressures we're facing." I met his gaze steadily. "I imagine they would be. The Helixon architecture alone generates what percentage of Axiom's revenue? 65% at last quarterly report?" Dr. Voss nodded almost imperceptibly. I continued, "And the thermal regulation system is licensed to 7 of the top 10 smartphone manufacturers worldwide." Nolan leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Kira, you've been with Axiom from nearly the beginning. Your contributions are undeniable. But business realities sometimes necessitate difficult decisions." "I understand business realities perfectly," I replied. "Which is why my contract was structured to ensure my intellectual property received appropriate valuation regardless of changing management perspectives." Imani, the legal counsel, spoke for the first time. "The conditional licensing arrangement is unusual but legally sound. I've confirmed the patent assignments all reference the original employment agreement." Vivienne's expression tightened. "This feels like coercion." I turned to her with perfect composure. "Protecting what one has created isn't coercion, Ms. Wright. It's prudence. Something valued in engineering, if not always in management consulting." The subtle barb hit its mark. Vivienne's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. "What are you seeking, Kira?" Nolan asked directly. "Let's put all cards on the table." I'd prepared for this question, rehearsed it during my sleepless night. Recognition of my ongoing value to Axiom. Continuation of my current role and compensation for 3 years, after which I'll transition to a technical advisor position at appropriate reduced hours. Formal mentorship responsibility for our junior engineers. And attribution for my contributions in all relevant company materials. "And in exchange?" Marcus prompted. "Continued exclusive licensing of my existing patents at current terms, plus first rights to the new thermal regulation system I've developed, the one that could put us 3 years ahead of competitors." The room fell silent as they processed my terms. I watched emotions play across their faces, frustration from Vivienne, calculation from Marcus, thoughtful consideration from Dr. Voss, and measured assessment from Nolan. "We'll need to discuss this privately," Nolan said finally. I nodded and rose. "Of course. I'll be at my workstation." As I reached the door, Vivienne's voice stopped me. "This strategy might preserve your position temporarily, Ms. Sakamoto, but it hardly demonstrates team commitment." I turned, meeting her gaze directly. "I've dedicated 15 years to building Axiom's success. I've missed family events, worked through weekends, and solved problems others deemed impossible. My commitment isn't measured in acquiescence to poor decisions, but in the foundation of innovation I've helped create." The walk back to my desk felt like floating. For 15 years, I'd been the quiet force behind Axiom's technological edge, content to let others take center stage while I focused on the work itself. But sometimes, standing in your power requires standing in the spotlight, however uncomfortable that might be. The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. I attended to routine tasks, reviewing code submissions from junior engineers, providing feedback on test protocols, answering technical questions that came my way. All while acutely aware of the conversation happening 7 floors above that would determine my professional future. At 11:42, my monitor pinged with a meeting request. Project Helixon Evolution, Strategic Planning. 1 p.m., Executive Conference Room. The attendee list included the entire morning's participants plus the VP of Product Development. I allowed myself a small smile. They weren't calling me back to continue termination discussions. They were pivoting to include me in strategic planning, exactly where I belonged. The 2 hours before the meeting stretched endlessly. I forced myself to eat lunch, though I barely tasted the salad I'd packed. Around me, the engineering floor hummed with its usual energy, the quiet murmur of technical discussions, the occasional burst of celebration when someone solved a particularly challenging problem, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards as ideas transformed into code. This was my world. The world Vivienne had tried to remove me from with a few spreadsheet calculations that completely missed the true value equation. At 12:55, I gathered my tablet, notebook, and a small portable drive containing the complete documentation for my latest innovation. When I stepped into the executive conference room at precisely 1 o'clock, the dynamic had visibly shifted from the morning meeting. Nolan greeted me with newfound respect. Dr. Voss actually pulled out the chair next to hers. A clear alignment signal. Marcus nodded with businesslike acknowledgement. Vivienne's smile remained fixed and professional, but the tension in her shoulders told a different story. Kira, thank you for joining us, Nolan began. We've had productive discussions this morning about Axiom's strategic direction and your role in our continued success. I nodded, waiting. We'd like to propose a modified arrangement that we believe addresses your core concerns while aligning with company objectives. Marcus took over, outlining the counterproposal. My current role and compensation would continue for 2 years. Guaranteed, with a third-year contingent on specific company performance metrics. I would lead a new technical innovation legacy team, focusing on both cutting-edge development and mentoring junior talent. My patent contributions would be formally acknowledged in company materials and industry presentations. In exchange, Dr. Voss continued, we ask for continued exclusive licensing of your patents and joint ownership of new innovations developed during this period, with appropriate inventor attribution and success bonuses tied to market performance. The terms weren't exactly what I'd requested, but they were substantive and respectful. Most importantly, they recognized my value beyond a simple salary figure on a cost-cutting spreadsheet. I appreciate the thoughtful proposal, I said. I'd like to suggest one modification. The third year should be guaranteed, with performance metrics determining an optional fourth year. Marcus started to object, but Nolan raised a hand. That seems reasonable. Anything else? Yes. I'd like written acknowledgement that any future restructuring discussions involving my position must include comprehensive intellectual property impact assessment. Vivienne couldn't contain herself. That's highly unusual. We can't create special provisions for individual employees. You already have, I pointed out calmly. My original contract contains special provisions that were overlooked in this restructuring attempt. I'm simply asking that history not repeat itself. Dr. Voss nodded. It's a fair safeguard, and one we should probably implement more broadly for key innovation personnel. Nolan studied me with new eyes. Not as a cost center to be optimized, but as a strategic asset to be protected. Agreed. Legal will draft the appropriate language. We spent the next hour discussing the latest Helixon evolution, my thermal regulation breakthrough and its potential market implications. For the first time in weeks, the conversation focused on innovation rather than cost-cutting. Engineers understand that true value isn't always captured in quarterly spreadsheets, sometimes it lives in the breakthroughs that reshape entire industries. As the meeting concluded, Nolan asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once the room had cleared, he spoke with surprising candor. I owe you an apology, Kira. We brought Vivienne in to help us navigate market pressures, but her approach was too narrow. She identified salary outliers without understanding the complete value equation. I appreciated his directness. Many companies make that mistake. They optimize for short-term metrics at the expense of long-term innovation. He nodded thoughtfully. We won't make that mistake again. The new technical innovation legacy team is more than just a compromise, it's a recognition that we need to better connect our past breakthroughs with our future direction. I look forward to building it, I said sincerely. As I walked back to my workspace, I noticed Vivienne in her glass office, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing with barely contained frustration. Through the transparent walls, I could read her body language clearly. She was explaining to someone why her restructuring plan had hit an unexpected roadblock. I didn't take pleasure in her discomfort. She wasn't a villain, just a consultant. Doing exactly what she'd been hired to do, reduce costs without understanding the complete value architecture of a technology company. The failure wasn't entirely hers, it belonged equally to a system that reduced human innovation to line items on a spreadsheet. Word traveled quickly through Axiom's engineering department. By the following morning, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Junior engineers who had avoided eye contact for weeks, afraid of association with someone apparently on the chopping block, now sought me out with questions and ideas. Senior colleagues nodded with newfound respect, having heard whispers of how I'd stood my ground. I maintained my usual routine, focusing on the work rather than office politics. But I couldn't help noticing how Vivienne's influence seemed to diminish with each passing day. Her cost-cutting presentations now included careful caveats about preserving critical innovation resources. The aggressive timeline for resource optimization stretched into a more measured approach. 3 weeks later, I received an official letter confirming my new position as Director of Technical Innovation Legacy, along with the amended employment agreement containing all the protections we'd discussed. The document included a personal note from Nolan: "Your contributions built Axiom's foundation. Now help us build its future." That same afternoon, I filed the patent application for the thermal regulation breakthrough, with Axiom Technologies as the assignee under our new agreement. It felt right, a balanced recognition of both individual innovation and collective enterprise. The following Monday brought an unexpected encounter in the research lab. I was reviewing prototype performance data when Vivienne appeared at my workstation. Her usual polished confidence seemed muted. "Do you have a moment, Ms. Sakamoto?" I nodded, gesturing to a nearby collaboration space where we could speak privately. Once seated, she seemed to struggle with her words, unusual for someone whose career was built on persuasive communication. "I've been reassessing our organizational structure based on the executive team's revised priorities." I waited, giving her space to continue. "Your new department, Technical Innovation Legacy, requires performance metrics that align with its unique value proposition." She passed me a tablet displaying a draft evaluation framework. "I'd appreciate your input before I present this to leadership." The gesture was significant. Not just a professional courtesy, but an acknowledgement that I possessed insights she needed. I reviewed the document carefully, noting both its strengths and limitations. "This captures the quantitative aspects well," I observed, "but innovation metrics need qualitative dimensions too. Breakthrough thinking isn't always linear or predictable." "What would you suggest?" she asked, and I was surprised by the genuine curiosity in her voice. We spent the next hour developing a more nuanced framework, one that balanced immediate performance indicators with longer-term innovation potential. For the first time, we engaged as colleagues rather than adversaries. As we concluded, Vivienne hesitated before standing. "I misunderstood your value to Axiom," she said finally. "My assessment focused too narrowly on salary benchmarking without adequate consideration of intellectual property implications." The admission clearly cost her professional pride. I nodded, acknowledging both her mistake and her courage in addressing it directly. "Innovation defies simple metrics," I replied. "That's what makes it powerful, and sometimes difficult to defend in traditional business frameworks." She considered this. "I've been brought in to optimize dozens of companies, but none with your particular situation. It's been educational." I smiled slightly. "Education is rarely comfortable but usually valuable." As she turned to leave, I added, "Your optimization framework isn't wrong, Vivienne. It's just incomplete for innovation-driven organizations. Perhaps that's an opportunity to evolve your own approach." Something shifted in her expression, a recognition that criticism could contain constructive potential rather than merely judgment. She nodded once, briskly professional again, and departed. The following weeks brought a remarkable transformation at Axiom. Rather than slashing positions indiscriminately, the restructuring evolved into a thoughtful realignment. Cost savings came through process improvements and technology optimization, rather than losing valuable team members. My new department took shape with a carefully selected mix of experienced engineers and promising newcomers. I began each day with renewed purpose, no longer just developing technology but cultivating the next generation of innovators. We established weekly knowledge-sharing sessions where senior engineers presented not just their successes but their failures, the dead ends and mistakes that ultimately led to breakthroughs. These became the most popular meetings in the company, often standing room only as people from all departments came to learn. Vivienne remained at Axiom longer than originally planned, her role expanding from cost-cutting to comprehensive organizational development. We maintained a professional relationship built on mutual respect, if not exactly warmth. Occasionally she would seek my input on innovation metrics or knowledge transfer protocols, and I provided honest feedback without dwelling on our past conflict. 6 months after our confrontation in the termination meeting, Axiom released the first product incorporating my thermal regulation breakthrough. The industry response was immediate and enthusiastic. Our stock price jumped 18% in a single day as analysts recognized the competitive advantage the technology provided. At the company-wide celebration, Nolan publicly acknowledged My role in developing the innovation and building the team that brought it to market. The applause from my colleagues, especially the junior engineers I'd been mentoring, meant more than any formal recognition. Later that evening, as the gathering was winding down, Marcus the CFO approached me with a slightly sheepish expression. "You know," he said, offering me a glass of champagne, "your salary doesn't look nearly as expensive on our balance sheet anymore." I accepted the glass with a smile. Value and cost are different equations. He nodded thoughtfully. A lesson. Worth the learning curve. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how close Axiom had come to losing its patent foundation, not through malice but through the narrowed perspective that treats people as interchangeable resources rather than unique sources of innovation. My stand hadn't just protected my position, it had helped recalibrate how the entire organization valued its intellectual foundation. The following week, I received an industry award for lifetime innovation contribution. As I stood at the podium looking out at a room filled with engineers, entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders, I thought about what message would matter most to those still building their careers. Innovation isn't just about creating something new, I told them. It's about understanding the value of what you create, and having the courage to stand firmly in that value when others fail to recognize it. Your greatest contribution might not be the patent that bears your name, but the moment you refuse to let your innovation be undervalued. It happened on a Thursday. The kind of Thursday where the Minneapolis spring rain tapped against the windows with quiet persistence, and the office hummed with end-of-quarter energy. I was deep in code review with 2 junior engineers when my monitor pinged with an urgent meeting request from Dr. Voss. Strategic discussion, immediate, CEO office. The timing felt strange. We were 2 weeks from our major product announcement, and leadership meetings had been scheduled with military precision. An impromptu gathering suggested something unexpected had entered the equation. I saved my work, briefed the junior engineers on how to proceed in my absence, and made my way to the executive floor. The atmosphere there carried a distinct tension, administrative. Assistants speaking in hushed tones, the normally open office doors conspicuously closed. Nolan's assistant waved me directly into the CEO's office without the usual wait. Inside, I found a scene that instantly set off warning signals in my engineer's mind. Nolan stood by the window, his posture rigid. Dr. Voss sat at the conference table, her normally meticulous notes scattered haphazardly. Marcus the CFO was on a video call in the corner, speaking too quietly for me to hear the content but loudly enough to catch his tone, urgent, defensive. Most tellingly, Vivienne was nowhere to be seen. "Kara, thank you for coming quickly," Nolan said, turning from the window. "We have a situation that requires your immediate input." I took the offered seat, maintaining the calm exterior I'd perfected over decades in crisis-prone technology development. "How can I help?" Dr. Voss slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was an article from TechWire, one of the industry's most respected publications. The headline made my blood run cold: Axiom Technologies faces patent challenge from Quantum Velocity. Quantum Velocity, our fiercest competitor, known for aggressive market tactics and deep pockets. They've been playing catch-up to our technology. For years, always a step behind but never giving up the chase. They're claiming prior art on core elements of the thermal regulation system, Dr. Voss explained, her voice tight. They've filed challenges with the Patent Office and issued press statements suggesting our upcoming product line infringes on their intellectual property. I quickly scanned the article, my mind already racing through the implications. The thermal regulation system, my system, the one that had saved my position at Axiom and was about to revolutionize our product line. "This is baseless," I said with absolute certainty. "The approach is entirely novel. I've reviewed every relevant patent in the field during development." Nolan nodded. "That's what our legal team believes as well, but Quantum Velocity is making a lot of noise. They've hired Preston Lambert to lead their challenge." The name sent a ripple of concern through me. Preston Lambert was the patent world's equivalent of a celebrity litigator, known for aggressive tactics and theatrical courtroom performances that played well with both judges and the media. Marcus ended his call and joined us at the table. "The market is already responding. Our stock dropped 7% in the last hour. Analysts are advising caution pending resolution of the patent questions." "What does Vivienne say?" I asked, noting her conspicuous absence. A silence fell over the room. Nolan and Dr. Voss exchanged glances. "That's part of the complication," Nolan said finally. "Vivienne resigned yesterday. Effective immediately." The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. "She went to Quantum Velocity," I stated rather than asked. Nolan nodded grimly. "Chief Strategy Officer, according to the press release that went out this morning." The pieces clicked into place with cold clarity. Vivienne had spent 6 months inside Axiom, with access to strategic plans, product roadmaps, and, most critically, detailed knowledge of which patents underpinned our market advantage. My patents. The ones she had initially failed to properly value. She couldn't have shared the actual technical details, I reasoned aloud. She wouldn't have understood them well enough to explain them. No, Dr. Voss agreed. But she could have identified which patents to target and provided insight into our product timeline. Enough for quantum velocity to construct a challenge designed to disrupt our launch and rattle investor confidence. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts with the same methodical precision I applied to engineering problems. Let me review their specific claims. I need to understand exactly what they're asserting as prior art. For the next 3 hours, I worked with Axiom's legal team, dissecting quantum velocity's challenge line by line. The more I examined their claims, the more confident I became that they were engaging in legal theater rather than presenting substantive arguments. They had identified enough technical language to sound credible to non-specialists, but their assertions of similarity to existing patents were superficial at best. This is a market disruption tactic, not a legitimate challenge, I concluded, addressing the assembled team in the legal department's conference room. They're trying to create uncertainty before our product launch. They don't expect to win on the technical merits, they just want to win in the court of public opinion long enough to damage our position. Imani Washington, our chief counsel, nodded in agreement. That's consistent with Preston Lambert's typical approach. He specializes in creating doubt rather than proving infringement. So how do we respond? Marcus asked, the financial implications clearly foremost in his mind. Directly and transparently, I said without hesitation. We need to demonstrate the uniqueness of our innovation in terms clear enough for the market to understand, not just the patent office. That risks revealing technical details we'd prefer to keep proprietary, Dr. Voss cautioned. I shook my head. The patents are already public. What matters now is controlling the narrative around them. If we appear defensive or secretive, it reinforces quantum velocity's insinuations. Nolan considered this. Kira's right. We need to be proactive and confident. He turned to me. How quickly can you prepare a technical briefing that explains the innovation in accessible terms? I can have it ready by tomorrow morning, I promised. But I think we need more than just a briefing. We need to demonstrate the technology's uniqueness in a way that can't be misinterpreted. The next 12 hours became a blur of focused activity. I worked through the night with a small team of our most talented engineers, preparing both detailed technical rebuttals for the legal proceedings and simplified explanations for media outlets and industry analysts. We created visual demonstrations comparing our thermal regulation approach with existing technologies, highlighting the fundamental differences that made our innovation unique. By dawn, fueled by determination and industrial quantities of coffee, we had assembled a comprehensive response strategy. I had just finished reviewing the final presentation when Nolan appeared at the door of our makeshift war room. You look like you haven't slept, he observed. Sleep is for people who haven't had their integrity questioned, I replied with a tired smile. He nodded, understanding completely. The executive team is assembling at 7. Preston Lambert is scheduled to appear on Tech Talk at 9 to discuss their challenge. We need to get ahead of that. I gathered my materials and followed him to the executive conference room, where the leadership team had already gathered. Despite the early hour and the crisis atmosphere, I felt a surprising sense of calm. This wasn't just about defending Axiom's market position, it was about standing up for the integrity of my life's work. Here's what we know, I began, commanding the room's attention with quiet authority. Quantum velocity's challenge centers on 3 claims of prior art, none of which actually overlap with our thermal regulation system's core innovations. They've constructed a narrative that sounds plausible to non-specialists but falls apart under technical scrutiny. I walked the team through each claim, methodically dismantling quantum velocity's arguments and highlighting the fundamental differences between existing technologies and our breakthrough approach. The presentation was technical but accessible, designed to equip our leadership with clear talking points for external communications. What they're doing, I concluded, is weaponizing complexity. They're betting that most people, including investors and customers, won't understand the technical details well enough to recognize the emptiness of their claims. Our job is to make the truth so clear that their strategy backfires. Nolan studied the materials thoughtfully. This is excellent work, Kira. But we still face a perception challenge. Preston Lambert is a persuasive speaker, and Vivienne knows exactly which pressure points to target in our market position. Then we need someone equally persuasive to counter them, I said. Someone who understands the technology intimately and can explain it convincingly. All eyes in the room turned to me. You want me to be the public face of our response? I stated, recognizing their unspoken suggestion. You're the original inventor, Dr. Voss pointed out. No one can speak to the innovation with more authority. I hesitated. Throughout my career, I'd always preferred to let my work speak for itself, staying behind the scenes while marketing teams handled public communications. But this was different. This was personal. I'll do it, I decided. But I want to do more than just respond to their claims. I want to demonstrate the technology in action. 2 hours later, I found myself in a hastily arranged broadcasting setup in Axiom's main conference room. A technical team had assembled a working prototype of our thermal regulation system connected to real-time performance monitors. The display was elegant in its simplicity, showing exactly how our approach differed from conventional methods, with temperature and power consumption metrics clearly visible. As Preston Lambert appeared on Tech Talk, delivering his carefully crafted insinuations about Axiom's derivative technology with practiced concern, our team monitored the market response. Axiom's stock dipped further, and social media exploded with speculation about the validity of our patents. 30 minutes after Lambert's interview concluded, I sat before cameras for a live-streamed technical briefing. I wore no special outfit. Applied no performance makeup, just my standard business attire and the quiet confidence of someone who knows their truth intimately. Good morning, I began, looking directly into the camera. I'm Kira Sakamoto, Director of Technical Innovation Legacy at Axiom Technologies and the primary inventor of the thermal regulation system that's been the subject of recent discussion. I'm here to address the patent challenge filed by Quantum Velocity and to demonstrate why their claims lack technical merit. For the next 20 minutes, I walked viewers through the fundamental principles of thermal management in microprocessors, the limitations of existing approaches, and the breakthrough thinking that led to our innovation. I used simple analogies and clear visualizations, making complex engineering concepts accessible without oversimplification. Then came the demonstration. I activated the prototype, showing in real time how our system dynamically adjusted to processing demands with unprecedented efficiency. The performance metrics told their own story, power consumption dropping by 34% while maintaining optimal operating temperature, something no existing technology could achieve. This isn't an incremental improvement on existing methods, I explained. It's a fundamental rethinking of how thermal regulation works at the architectural level. The approach is novel, the implementation is unique, and the results speak for themselves. I concluded by directly addressing the challenge. Innovation builds on what came before, that's the nature of technological progress. But true breakthroughs require more than recombining existing elements. They demand new perspectives and fresh approaches to persistent problems. That's what we've created here, and we stand firmly behind its originality and integrity. As the broadcast ended, the conference room erupted in applause. The technical demonstration had been flawless, the explanation clear and compelling. Within minutes, industry analysts began posting positive assessments of our response, and our stock price started to recover. But the real battle was just beginning. Later that afternoon, Preston Lambert issued a statement dismissing our demonstration as theatrical distraction and reiterating Quantum Velocity's intention to pursue their challenge through appropriate legal channels. Meanwhile, tech blogs reported that Vivienne had been seen entering Quantum Velocity's headquarters with an entourage of attorneys. The next week brought intense pressure from all directions. Our legal team worked around the clock preparing formal responses to the patent challenge. Our marketing department fielded constant inquiries from journalists and analysts. Our sales team struggled to reassure nervous customers about the future of our product line. Through it all, I maintained a dual focus, supporting the legal defense while continuing to lead my technical team toward our product launch. We couldn't allow Quantum Velocity's tactics to derail our innovation timeline, even as we defended its legitimacy. 10 days into the crisis, Imani Washington requested my presence at an emergency legal strategy meeting. When I arrived, I found not just our internal counsel but also representatives from Blackwood and Chen, one of the country's premier intellectual property law firms. We've uncovered something interesting, Imani began without preamble. She nodded to a young attorney who activated a large display screen. This is a timeline of Quantum Velocity's research activities based on their published papers, patent filings, and conference presentations, the attorney explained, pointing to a comprehensive chart. And here, she highlighted a section, is the period during which they claim to have developed the technology that supposedly constitutes prior art to your system. I studied the timeline carefully, immediately noticing the discrepancy. Their claimed development period overlaps with their public statements about pursuing an entirely different thermal management approach. Exactly, Imani confirmed. They were publicly committed to quantum phase cooling during that entire period. There's no evidence they were exploring anything remotely similar to your architectural approach. That's helpful for defending against their claim, I acknowledged, but it doesn't prove they weren't conducting parallel research they kept confidential. The senior partner from Blackwood and Chen leaned forward. That's where things get interesting. We've subpoenaed their internal research documentation through discovery. Their responses have been suspiciously limited. They're hiding something, I surmised. Or there's nothing to find, Imani suggested. We believe their entire prior art claim might be fabricated, constructed after the fact based on information Vivienne provided about your innovation. The implications were staggering. If true, quantum velocity wasn't just engaging in aggressive legal tactics, they were committing fraud. Can we prove it? I asked. Not yet, the Blackwood partner admitted. But we've filed a motion to compel more comprehensive discovery. If they can't produce contemporaneous research records supporting their claimed development timeline, they'll be exposed, I finished the thought. The legal proceedings intensified over the following weeks, with motions and counter-motions flying between legal teams. The technical aspects of the case became increasingly esoteric, requiring me to provide detailed explanations to our attorneys about subtle engineering distinctions that would determine whether quantum velocity's claims had any validity. Throughout this period, I maintained my public presence, giving carefully considered interviews and technical briefings that reinforced Axiom's position without revealing our legal strategy. The market responded positively to my steady confidence, and our stock gradually recovered its losses as investors recognized the weakness in quantum velocity's challenge. Then came the turning point. 42 days into the dispute, a junior member of our legal team discovered a critical inconsistency in quantum velocity's technical documentation. A component they claimed to have used in their alleged prior development hadn't been commercially available until months after their purported testing period. It's a small detail, the young lawyer explained during our strategy session, but it creates an impossible timeline. They couldn't have conducted the tests they described using components that didn't exist yet. Imani immediately recognized the significance. This gives us grounds to aggressively challenge the authenticity of all their documentation. It's the thread that could unravel their entire case. When confronted with this discrepancy, Quantum Velocity's legal team requested a temporary stay to review and clarify their technical submissions. The judge granted them 48 hours, standard procedure, but telling in its implications. The following morning, I arrived at my office to find an unexpected email in my inbox. The sender, Vivienne Wright. The subject line, meeting request, confidential. I stared at the screen, wondering what possible reason she could have for reaching out directly. After consultation with our legal team, I agreed to a meeting on neutral ground, a private room at the Minneapolis Public Library, with both our attorneys present. Vivienne arrived alone, without Preston Lambert or any quantum velocity representatives. She looked different, the polished corporate sheen replaced by visible strain, her confidence muted by circumstance. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she began, once we were seated across from each other, our respective attorneys flanking us like seconds in a duel. I'm listening, I replied neutrally. Quantum Velocity is withdrawing their patent challenge, she stated without preamble. The formal notification will be filed with the patent office by end of day. Our attorney leaned forward. May I ask what prompted this sudden reversal? Vivienne's expression remained carefully composed. Internal review determined the challenge lacked sufficient merit to continue. That's an interesting way of saying they fabricated their claims, I observed. She didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was telling. Why are you here, Vivienne? I asked directly. This notification could have come through official channels. She hesitated, seemingly weighing her words carefully. I wanted to convey personally that I had no knowledge of certain procedural irregularities in how the challenge was constructed. When I became aware of them, I advocated for immediate withdrawal. Our attorney scoffed quietly. That's a remarkably convenient position. It's the truth, Vivienne insisted, meeting my gaze directly. I provided strategic counsel based on my knowledge of Axiom's market position, but I did not authorize or participate in any misrepresentation of technical facts. I studied her carefully, trying to read between the carefully chosen words. You realized they crossed a line you weren't willing to cross, and now you're protecting yourself from the fallout. Something flickered in her expression, perhaps recognition, perhaps respect. I'm ensuring that a mistake is corrected before further damage occurs. How you interpret my motivations is your prerogative. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with formal assurances about the withdrawal timeline and a carefully worded joint statement for public release. As Vivienne rose to leave, she paused, looking directly at me. For what it's worth, your Technical demonstration was masterful. The innovation is everything you claimed, truly original and significant. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You were right about your value all along. With that acknowledgement, as close to an apology as her professional pride would allow, she departed, leaving behind the unmistakable impression of a strategic retreat rather than a surrender. By late afternoon, the news had broken publicly. Quantum Velocity's stock tumbled as analysts questioned their credibility and business practices. Axiom's value surged, strengthened rather than damaged by the challenge. The crisis that had threatened our product launch had transformed into powerful validation of our innovation's legitimacy. In the aftermath, Preston Lambert quietly disappeared from Quantum Velocity's public communications. Industry rumors suggested he had been relegated to internal matters pending a professional development period, corporate speak for punishment, without admission of wrongdoing. As for Vivienne, her position as Chief Strategy Officer was restructured within weeks, her responsibilities distributed among existing executives. Her LinkedIn profile later listed her as an independent strategic consultant, the corporate equivalent of exile. The product launch exceeded every expectation. Our thermal regulation system, now branded as heatsink architecture, transformed Axiom's market position overnight. Technology reviewers used words like revolutionary and game-changing, without hyperbole. The performance advantages were too significant to describe any other way. Orders flooded in from smartphone manufacturers, server farm operators, and consumer electronics companies, all desperate to incorporate our innovation into their next generation of products. 3 months after launch, I stood at the window of my expanded office, watching Minnesota's summer storms roll across the Minneapolis skyline. Lightning illuminated the Axiom logo atop our building, larger now, more prominent after our stock surge enabled the acquisition of 2 adjacent properties to accommodate our growing workforce. My reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed. Not by the trappings of success, but by the quiet confidence that comes from vindication. The patents that had once been my personal insurance policy had become the foundation of Axiom's renaissance. My name, once buried in technical documentation, now appeared in industry publications and business school case studies. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Voss entered, tablet in hand, her expression suggesting news rather than casual conversation. The quarterly numbers just came in, she said without preamble. Heatsink licensing revenue exceeded projections by 42%. I nodded, pleased but not surprised. The Samsung integration is performing even better than our tests predicted. Word travels fast in manufacturing circles. That's not all, she continued, handing me the tablet. The board approved the expansion proposal unanimously. We're breaking ground on the new R&D facility next month. They're calling it the Sakamoto Innovation Center. I stared at the screen, momentarily speechless. The plans showed a sleek, modern structure with my name prominently displayed at the entrance. I never expected this level of recognition. It was Nolan's idea, actually. He said it's important for institutions to honor their intellectual foundations. Dr. Voss smiled slightly. I believe that's his way of acknowledging how close we came to losing you, and everything you've created. The conversation shifted to technical matters, upcoming research initiatives, potential applications for heatsink in emerging markets, mentorship programs for our growing engineering team. But beneath the practical discussion ran an undercurrent of shared understanding. Axiom had narrowly avoided becoming yet another company that discarded its innovative core in pursuit of short-term financial metrics. Later that afternoon, I led a development session with the newest members of my expanded department. 20 bright minds, ranging from recent graduates to mid-career specialists, all selected for their combination of technical brilliance and innovative thinking. We were exploring applications of heatsink principles beyond traditional computing environments, medical devices, transportation systems, renewable energy storage. The fundamental insight that makes heatsink revolutionary isn't the specific implementation, I explained, drawing diagrams on the interactive whiteboard. It's the conceptual framework, the willingness to challenge assumptions about how thermal energy must be managed. The question isn't, how do we remove heat more efficiently? But, how do we rethink the relationship between computational processing and thermal generation? A young engineer named Zara raised her hand. That's what I don't understand about the quantum velocity challenge. How could they claim prior art when the entire approach is built on a paradigm shift they never explored? I considered how to answer without rekindling corporate tensions. Innovation exists in a competitive landscape. Sometimes challenges arise from genuine parallel development. Brilliant minds often reach similar conclusions when working on the same problems. Other times, I paused, choosing my words carefully, challenges are strategic rather than substantive. You mean they were trying to slow us down with legal tactics, another engineer said bluntly. I mean that innovation disrupts existing business models, I corrected gently. That disruption creates both opportunity and resistance. Understanding that dynamic is as important as understanding the technology itself. The session continued, rich with questions and ideas that pushed beyond conventional thinking. I found myself energized by their enthusiasm, their willingness to challenge even my assumptions. This was the true value of the Technical Innovation Legacy Department, not just preserving what we had built, but nurturing the mindset that would create the next breakthrough. As the meeting concluded, Zara lingered behind. Can I ask you something personal, Dr. Sakamoto? I nodded, curious about what had prompted her hesitation. There's a story going around, about how you were almost let go before heatsink was developed. About how you stood your ground because you owned the patents. She seemed almost embarrassed by her curiosity. Is it true? News traveled through engineering departments with remarkable efficiency, each retelling adding layers to the narrative. I wondered what version Zara had heard, heroic stand or corporate drama. The reality was more nuanced than most stories suggest, I replied honestly. But yes, there was a period when my value to Axiom was questioned, and my ownership of key patents became relevant to that discussion. Weren't you afraid? Standing up to executives, I mean. The question gave me pause. Had I been afraid? Certainly concerned, possibly anxious about the confrontation. But fear hadn't been the dominant emotion. I was confident in my worth, I said finally. Not just my technical contributions, but my understanding of how those contributions created value. That confidence made it possible to advocate for myself effectively. Zara nodded thoughtfully. I hope I can have that kind of confidence someday. It's not something that appears magically, I told her. It's built through consistent creation of value, clear documentation of your contributions, and honest assessment of your impact. Do those things, and confidence follows naturally. After she left, I reflected on how that moment of crisis had transformed not just my career trajectory but my understanding of innovation's value in corporate environments. The patents had been important, certainly, they provided the leverage needed to force reconsideration of a flawed decision. But the true foundation of my position had been the innovative thinking those patents represented. The following week brought an unexpected invitation. The World Innovation Forum, the premier global gathering of technology leaders and visionaries, requested my participation as a keynote speaker. The topic, intellectual property as innovation currency in modern enterprises. I accepted with a mixture of pride and trepidation. Public speaking had never been my preferred mode of communication. I was an engineer, more comfortable with schematics than spotlights. But the opportunity to shape the conversation around innovation value was too significant to decline. Preparation for the keynote became a welcome challenge. I worked with Axiom's communications team to develop a presentation that balanced technical insight with accessible concepts, personal experience with broader industry trends. The goal wasn't to rehash the drama of my near termination or the quantum velocity challenge, but to extract meaningful principles from those experiences. 3 weeks later, I stood backstage at the Geneva Convention Center, listening to the moderator's introduction. The audience of 2,000 included CEOs, research directors, venture capitalists, policymakers, a global cross-section of innovation leadership. Among them, according to the attendance list, was a delegation from Quantum Velocity, though Vivienne's name was conspicuously absent. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Kira Sakamoto, the moderator announced, whose heatsink architecture has redefined thermal management in computing systems and whose personal journey illustrates the complex relationship between individual innovation and corporate value creation. As I walked onto the stage, the applause felt surreal, acknowledgement not just of technical achievement but of the principles I had defended. The bright lights obscured most of the audience, creating the illusion of intimate conversation despite the venue's scale. Innovation exists at the intersection of problem and possibility, I began, setting aside the traditional thank yous and pleasantries. It emerges when we see challenges not as constraints but as invitations to reimagine fundamental assumptions. For the next 40 minutes, I walked the audience through the evolution of thermal management in computing, the conceptual breakthrough that led to heatsink, and the broader implications for how organizations value and protect innovation. I shared insights from my mentorship work with young engineers and observations about innovation cycles in technology enterprises. Then I addressed the elephant in the room, the relationship between individual innovators and corporate structures. Patents and intellectual property protections serve a dual purpose, I explained. They provide necessary market protection for the enterprises that commercialize innovation, but they also ensure recognition and value for the individuals whose Creative thinking makes that innovation possible. When those purposes align, extraordinary progress becomes possible. When they conflict, both innovation and commerce suffer. I didn't mention Vivienne or quantum velocity by name. I didn't need to. The principles applied universally, beyond the specifics of my personal experience. The most forward-thinking organizations, I continued, recognize that innovative capacity isn't an abstract corporate asset. It resides in human minds, flourishes under specific conditions, and requires appropriate valuation. The companies that will lead tomorrow's technological revolutions won't be those with the largest research budgets or the most aggressive cost-cutting measures. They'll be those that create environments where innovation is properly understood, appropriately valued, and strategically protected. As I concluded to sustained applause, I felt a sense of completion, not just of the presentation, but of the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the engineer quietly working behind the scenes to the innovation leader helping shape industry understanding, each phase had built upon the last. The reception following the keynote brought a parade of handshakes, business cards, and conversations about innovation practices across industries. CEOs shared stories of their own struggles to properly value creative engineering talent. Patent attorneys discussed the evolving landscape of intellectual property protection. Young entrepreneurs sought advice on balancing innovation with business fundamentals. As the crowd thinned, I found myself approached by an unexpected figure, Roland Chen, the founder and CEO of Quantum Velocity. His reputation for ruthless competition preceded him, making his presence at my reception more intriguing than welcome. Dr. Sakamoto, he greeted me with practiced cordiality, a thought-provoking presentation. You've given our industry much to consider. Thank you, I replied with professional courtesy, curious about his purpose. I'm surprised to see you here. He smiled thinly. Learning opportunities emerge in unexpected places. Your perspective on innovation valuation is instructive. The subtext wasn't difficult to decipher. Quantum Velocity had suffered both financial and reputational damage from their failed challenge. Roland was taking the measure of the woman who had outmaneuvered his company's strategy. I believe proper valuation benefits the entire industry, I offered neutrally. A rising tide lifts all boats. Indeed. He studied me with calculating eyes. Though some boats rise higher than others. Your thermal regulation breakthrough has created quite the advantage for Axiom. Innovation often does, I acknowledged. Though I seem to recall Quantum Velocity exploring quantum phase cooling with promising results. The reference to their abandoned research direction, the path they'd been pursuing before attempting to claim my work, wasn't lost on him. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Research directions evolve based on market realities, he replied smoothly. Speaking of which, I understand you're expanding your technical team significantly. Perhaps we might discuss potential collaboration opportunities. The suggestion was remarkable in its audacity, a veiled attempt to gain access to Axiom's innovation pipeline after failing to undermine our patent position. I'm always open to meaningful collaborative discussions, I said carefully. With partners who demonstrate shared values around innovation integrity. Roland nodded, acknowledging the boundary I'd established. Values evolve too, Dr. Sakamoto. Companies learn from experience, just as individuals do. I certainly hope so, I replied, maintaining eye contact. For the benefit of the entire innovation ecosystem. With a final exchange of professional pleasantries, he departed, leaving me to consider the strange cyclical nature of corporate competition. The same company that had tried to claim my innovation now sought to learn from my approach to fostering it. The forum concluded the following day, and I returned to Minneapolis with renewed perspective on Axiom's position in the innovation landscape. Our success with Heatsink had transformed the company's market position, but the true test would be whether that success translated into sustainable innovation culture. 2 months later, that question found its answer in an unexpected form. Nolan called a company-wide meeting, unusual timing just before the winter holiday break. Speculation ran rampant through the engineering department. Acquisition rumors? Leadership changes? New product initiatives? The grand atrium of Axiom's headquarters filled with employees from all departments, the buzz of conversation creating a palpable energy. When Nolan took the stage, his expression gave nothing away. Thank you all for gathering on short notice, he began. I've asked you here to share some significant news about Axiom's future. The room quieted immediately, anticipation hanging in the air. For the past several months, the executive team has been engaged in comprehensive strategic planning. The success of Heatsink has created unprecedented opportunities and responsibilities for our organization. The question before us was how to leverage that success for sustainable growth while preserving the innovative spirit that made it possible. He paused, surveying the assembled employees. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Axiom Innovation Trust, a new corporate structure that places 15% of company ownership in the hands of our engineering and research teams, distributed based on patent contributions and innovation impact. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by murmurs of surprise and excitement. This isn't traditional profit sharing or standard equity compensation, Nolan continued. The Innovation Trust creates direct ownership alignment between Axiom's market success and the individuals whose intellectual contributions make that success possible. It establishes innovation as a formal value center within our corporate structure, not just a means to an end. As he outlined the details, I felt a profound sense of validation. The trust went beyond simple recognition or compensation, it fundamentally restructured the relationship between innovative capacity and corporate governance. The inspiration for this approach, Nolan concluded, came from a powerful lesson we learned last year, that innovative thinking creates value only when it's properly recognized, protected, and rewarded. We came dangerously close to forgetting that lesson. Thanks to one person's courage and conviction, we were reminded in time. His gaze found me in the audience, and he nodded with genuine respect. Dr. Sakamoto showed us that patents aren't just legal documents, they're recognition of the human creativity that drives our enterprise forward. The Innovation Trust institutionalizes that recognition for everyone whose ideas shape Axiom's future. The announcement transformed the company culture overnight. Engineers who had viewed their work primarily as technical problem-solving now understood their role as value creation in its most fundamental sense. The connection between innovation and corporate success became explicit, transparent, and directly rewarding. Later that evening, as holiday celebrations began across the company, Dr. Voss found me observing the festivities from a quiet corner. "You've transformed this place," she said, handing me a glass of champagne. "Not just with heatsink, but with everything that followed from it." I smiled, watching young engineers chatting excitedly about the trust announcement. "I didn't create the Innovation Trust. That was Nolan's vision." "A vision catalyzed by your stand," she pointed out. "Sometimes the most powerful innovations aren't technical at all, they're about how we value and structure human creativity." As midnight approached and the celebration wound down, I made my way to my office to collect my things before heading home. On my desk lay a small package, wrapped in simple silver paper, with no card or identification. Curious, I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed document, a reproduction of United States patent #9783421B, the original Helixon architecture patent that had started my journey at Axiom. Across the bottom, handwritten in elegant script, "The foundation matters. Thank you for defending yours and ours." I recognized Nolan's handwriting, and the gesture touched me deeply. The patent wasn't just a legal document or leverage tool, it represented the principle that innovation deserves proper valuation, that intellectual contributions create the foundation upon which corporate success is built. Driving home through Minneapolis's snowy streets, I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months. From the moment Vivienne had labeled me salary bloat to the creation of the Innovation Trust, each phase had reinforced a simple truth: true value isn't captured in spreadsheet calculations or quarterly metrics. It lives in the creative solutions to persistent problems, in the intellectual breakthroughs that open new possibilities. The patents hadn't just saved my position at Axiom, they had transformed the company's understanding of innovation itself. What began as personal advocacy had evolved into institutional reform, creating a model that recognized the human origins of technological progress. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone chimed with an email notification. A message from Zara, the young engineer who had asked about standing up for oneself. The subject line, "Patent application filed today." The body contained just one line: "Confidence built through creation of value. Thank you for showing the way." I smiled in the darkness of my car. The true legacy of my stand wasn't just in preserved patents or corporate structures, it was in the next generation of innovators who understood their worth and had the confidence to claim it. The following morning, as winter sunlight glinted off fresh snow, I placed the framed patent on my desk, a reminder not of past battles but of future possibilities. The heatsink technology would eventually be superseded by newer innovations, just as it had replaced previous approaches. Patents would expire, product cycles would complete, market positions would evolve. But the principle would endure, that the value of innovation transcends quarterly calculations, that intellectual contribution deserves proper recognition, and that sometimes the most important thing we create isn't a product or a patent, it's a precedent for how human creativity should be valued. I opened my laptop and began reviewing proposals from my expanded team, each representing potential new directions for Axiom's technology. One particularly intriguing concept caught my attention: a novel approach to quantum computing architecture that challenged fundamental assumptions about qubit stability. The proposal's author? Zara, stepping confidently into her power as an innovator. This was the real victory, not just preserving my own position or patents, but creating an environment where the next generation of technical visionaries could thrive, secure in the knowledge that their intellectual contributions would be properly valued. I sent Zara a meeting request to discuss her concept further, adding a personal note: innovation thrives when innovators are valued. Let's build on this foundation together. As I looked out my office window at the Sakamoto Innovation Center, under construction across the campus, I felt a profound sense of alignment between individual creativity and corporate mission, between technological progress and human recognition, between innovation's past and its future. They had called me salary bloat and discovered I owned the patents. But the true discovery wasn't about legal ownership, it was about the fundamental relationship between human creativity and corporate value. That relationship, now properly understood and institutionalized at Axiom, would generate innovations far beyond anything I could create alone. And that was worth more than any patent could protect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.